Hi, I'm Dr. Hackie Reitman. Welcome to another episode of Exploring Different Brains. And I'm very excited today because today we go across the pond. We go all the way over to the UK. And we're going to speak to someone named Jess Thom. And Jessica Thom herself did not get diagnosed until she was in her 20s with Tourette syndrome, which we're going to learn about today. Jessica, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Now, why don't you explain to our Different Brains audience, because some of them might not even know what Tourette's is, and I'd like you to explain it.
So Tourette syndrome, is a neurological condition, that means that is characterised by involuntary movements and noises called tics. So those can include vocal tics, hedgehog, like for me, and hedgehog, cats, and just so nothing gets lost in translation, when I say biscuit, I'd like you to think cookie. Hedgehog, cats, because biscuit means cookie in the UK. Hedgehog, beans. And also I have lots of involuntary motor tics, so involuntary movements, And for me, they include banging my chest hundreds of times a day, So I wear padded gloves to stop my knuckles getting cracked and bloody and to protect my chest. Hedgehog, cat.
In addition to the tics you're describing, do you have other challenges?
So Tourette's impacts on my life in a number of different ways. So includes the tics that you can see. But my motor tics affect my mobility. So I've got tics in my legs that mean my walking is very chaotic and wobbly. So I use a wheelchair to get around, which is much safer, and makes me much more independent. Hedgehog, and I am one of the 10% of people with Tourette's, who has coporalia, which is the technical name for obscene tics. So I have some rude and swearing tics as part of my condition. Most people, lots of people with Tourette's, about 80%, will have other associated conditions. So like obsessive compulsive disorder, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. I have some obsessive behaviour, but I don't have lots of those other co-associating conditions. I am, however, dyslexic and dyspraxic, which was my first diagnosis, the first things that emerged that demonstrated that I was neurodiverse, the first things to be identified for me.
Well, one of the reasons we founded differentbrains.com is because I think it's kind of a myth that any of these things exist in isolation, and they all have commonalities, common tools that can be used that are good for all of them. So we're trying to get all of these challenges and differences under one roof, whether it's neurological, intellectual, developmental, mental health, and you have a bunch of the gamut yourself. So you're a walking encyclopedia.
I embrace neurodiversity. So one of the reasons I created Touretteshero and co-founded Touretteshero was because it helped me recognize the amazing spontaneous creativity that having a brain that works differently gives me access to. And I've come to see that and understand that as my power and not my problem. Hedgehog, catch,
Could you repeat that again?
I've come to understand that my tics are my power and not my problem, because they give me access to an amazing spontaneous creativity that I wouldn't have otherwise, and my vocal tics often collide together really unusual concepts and words to create new ideas. Hedgehog, writing, I love cats.
What is the biggest misconception that civilians, people who are not in the neurodiversity community or the Tourette's community, what is the biggest misconception they might have about Tourette's?
I think the biggest misconception about Tourette's is that it's all about swearing. It's often characterised as the swearing disease, and people often don't get the support they need because people find that side of it comic or open to ridicule. In fact, only a very small percentage of people with Tourette's have rude tics. 90% don't have any swearing tics, obscene tics at all. Biscuit, I think other big myths are the fact that it's just saying what's on your mind, Biscuit. And I can promise you, I definitely don't think about biscuits, hedgehogs or cats nearly as much as I talk about them. Biscuit, and it's also not rare. It's not a rare condition. Biscuit, some people are affected in really mild ways and their tics will be barely noticeable, while others will be have more intense tics, which will be more obvious to other people. Biscuit, Biscuit.
What do you think the occurrence is?
Biscuit, I think it's about 1 in 100 is what I've understood it to be, the occurrence. Yeah.
Now, based on your knowledge, what's the big difference about the way Tourette's might be understood and treated in England versus how it might be over here in the United States?
We've had a really exciting opportunity with Backstage and Biscuit and to travel a lot to different countries, so to tour all over the UK and to tour and travel in the US. Biscuit, and actually what's interesting is that I think lots of the understandings and attitudes to Tourette's are similar. There are some people who have a lot of understanding and are really open to being supportive, and there's Biscuit, some people find it a more challenging condition and don't understand straight away and need some help to imagine what it's like to live with Tourette's. I think one of the things that I noticed more broadly was that in the US you have really great legislation around in the American with Disabilities Act around access to public spaces. And so I think that your legislation around disabled people and around access feels really strong. And we have legislation in the UK, but perhaps sometimes that's not always as enforced as enthusiastically as it seems to be in the US. And so spaces aren't maybe as accessible as they are in the States. One of the things that I do feel very proud to be part of in the UK is an amazing disability arts scene where there are lots of disabled people who are working as artists and making work about their experiences. And from what I've seen internationally, it can be harder for people who have different lived experiences to connect with each other, either because of the space or like distance or resources. And I suppose that's the one thing that has been really important to me is meeting other people with Tourette's, seeing other disabled artists and seeing people having careers and succeeding in all types of roles. And I think that's really important for young people who are neurodiverse and are living with a condition that potentially makes them stand out, is to see people who look, move and sound like they do, succeeding in all types of roles.
What has been your biggest challenge at this point in time?
Biscuit. I think some of the biggest challenges I have personally in terms of living with Tourette's is the fact that it's a fluctuating condition, so it goes up and down in the course of someone's life, which can mean that tics look quite different one day to how they might another day. And it can mean that just as you get used to a tic, a new set of tics can occur, and that can be shocking, and it can be hard to adjust, and it can be frightening to experience your mind or body changing in ways that you hadn't expected and to having to adjust to that. But there is yet to be a set of tics that I haven't been able to overcome with the right support and with some creative thinking.
Now, I see that the tics give you plenty of exercise. What else do you do for exercise?
I go swimming, so I swim almost every day. I love swimming and being in the water, and I'm very lucky to have a hydrotherapy pool near me as well. So as well as swimming for exercise, I can always swim for relaxation and to stretch my muscles. I also go to an amazing accessible cycling project called Wheels for Wellbeing that we have here in London that provides all sorts of adapted bicycles for disabled people to use. And that means that I can get my heart going and keep fit in a way that I might otherwise find challenging.
I can say as a sports medicine and orthopedic surgeon that one of the most underrated exercises and underused is getting in a pool and doing any kind of exercise, because it works in so many good ways. It's non-weight bearing for the most part. yet it's resistive, and it's cooling, and it soothes, and it's great. Now, we have plenty of studies to show how exercise successfully helps rewire your brain along with a good diet. What kind of diet do you eat?
Well, I'm mainly vegetarian, and I eat very little dairy products as well. So I wouldn't say that I'm a full vegan, but I try and follow a vegan diet, and I try and eat healthily and eat a variety of foods, and make sensible choices and eat things that I enjoy, but eat them in moderation. Ketchup.
Well, study after study has shown that a diet like yours, it's mainly plant-based or Mediterranean-style diet, and if you avoid all the processed stuff, that it really is helpful not only for your heart and your whole body, but they have numerous studies now showing the rewiring in your brain for a positive nature. Would you care to comment on for our audience out there who might have all different kinds of neurodiversity challenges, about interpersonal relationships?
I have a really strong support network, that's been really important to me as my tics have intensified. I also have a team of support workers. So although I have my tics affect my mobility, and my tics are sort of fairly constant, I also have sudden intensifications of tics several times a day, which can mean during which I can totally lose control of my body and speech, which means that I need constant support and supervision to make sure that I'm safe, and to mean that if my tics intensify, that I have someone on hand to make sure that I am not at risk. And that obviously, having that sort of level of intense support can put pressure on relationships, and it can be, and I've certainly found at the beginning, it really hard to accept that level of help. But a really important idea for me was the idea that another disabled comic, a friend of mine who's called Lawrence Clark, who's an amazing disabled comedian and writer. I read something that he wrote about the idea that being independent doesn't mean having to do everything for yourself. Being independent is about being in control of your decisions and knowing when to ask for help, and accepting help when you need it. So I consider myself fully independent, and I can lead an independent life, and I can be in control of my decisions. But I also need to do that. I need the support of other people. And I have lots of amazing supportive networks that have been crucial to me. And that includes other people with Tourette's. That includes the disability community. And it includes my support workers and personal assistants. Biscuit.
Jessica, you were not diagnosed until your 20s. What were you being told up until that time?
Well, as a child, my tics were much milder. The first tics that I can remember were when I was about 6. I was involuntarily squeaking, making facial expressions. My tics intensified in my early 20s. And began to have a much bigger impact on my life. And I initially resisted diagnosis because I didn't see what it would add to my life. I'd probably known I had Tourette's from my late teens, but I thought, well, what's the point in getting a diagnosis now? What will that add? But I was wrong. Being able to understand something that had always been a big part of me and have a way of explaining it to other people was absolutely crucial. And it also meant that I was able to get the right support, and tap into the right services and the right techniques and the right strategies to help me manage my life and my tics and a condition that changes. When I was a child, I did also have a diagnosis of dyslexia and dyspraxia, and I think my behaviour was very unusual and very impulsive, and I was very active. And I think I was lucky in that even though I didn't have a formal diagnosis of Tourette's, my unusual behaviour was understood in the context of neurodiversity. And I was actually supported well at school, despite the fact that people did it like Tourette's wasn't as well understood, and it wasn't something that had been identified as an issue for me.
Well, Jessica Thom, it is a pleasure to be speaking with you here. What other challenges might you have that are not readily apparent?
Okay. So I suppose one of the issues for me that most people wouldn't necessarily see at the moment, Biscuit, is that I have a sort of experience. I've been experiencing chronic pain for the last year. Biscuit, the exact cause of that hasn't been identified, but it's probably due to lots of the very sort of strong physical movements, involuntary movements that I make, and the impact of that on my body. And so I think for me, adjusting to living with pain has been a challenge, Biscuit, and that obviously has an impact on my stamina and my energy and my sleep, Biscuit. And sleep with Tourette's can be tricky, and getting to sleep and staying asleep can be hard. I use a weighted blanket to help me sleep, as well as trying to observe really healthy sleeping routines and practices, Biscuit. And I suppose sometimes, Biscuit, people see the big tics, they see the big movements and noises that I make, Biscuit, but there are often lots of smaller, less noticeable movements, and sometimes those are the ones that I notice, or that can prevent me from getting to sleep or can cause me pain, Biscuit.
What is one piece of advice you would give to someone who has just been diagnosed with Tourette's or other neurodiverse diagnosis?
Biscuit, I would say learn about the condition, Biscuit, and Biscuit, don't be afraid to find out more and to ask questions, Biscuit. Reach out, Biscuit, to the community of people living with that condition. For me, connecting with other people with Tourette's was really key in helping me to accept myself. I put it off for ages, and I don't know why, Biscuit. And then when I met other people with tics, I realised that I'd never expect them to hold their tics in or be embarrassed by them. So why did I expect that of myself? So don't be embarrassed by who you are. Don't be afraid to be open with other people. And Biscuit, accept yourself exactly as you are, and to develop ways of sharing that and your talents with other people. Biscuit.
Jessica Thom, how can our Different Brains audience learn more about you?
Biscuit, they can visit Touretteshero.com, our website, Biscuit, and explore it, or can follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter. And for any young Different Brains viewers, Biscuit, the website has a safe mode, and with one click you can remove and make invisible any rude words. Biscuit, hedgehog, cat. Biscuit.
Could you explain that a bit?
Biscuit, yes. Biscuit, so I am one of the 10% of people with Tourette's that has some rude tics. And not including them as part of the site, Biscuit, felt wrong. It felt like editing out part of my disability, and I wanted to make sure that they were included. Biscuit, because some of those tics are really funny and really interesting, and it's part of my lived experience. But we also wanted to make sure that the site was accessible to children and to young people and to a really broad audience. And so we created a safe mode, which means there's essentially two sites. There's the site with sort of more rude or adult content, and with one click of a button you can choose to make all of that invisible, so you can explore it with a child, share it with a child, Biscuit, and they can enjoy learning about Touretteshero without having to worry about seeing anything that might upset them or confuse them or lead to any uncomfortable conversations. Biscuit, catch.
Jessica, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure. I've learned so much talking to you. Keep up the great work you're doing on stage and off stage, and talking at TED lectures and doing all the stuff you do, teaching us all about Tourette's and other neurodiversity challenges. You're an inspiration. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. What a lovely conversation. Beans! Cats!
For more information, visit us at differentbrains.com.